Her worn sneakers crunched against the gravel as she walked toward precision point shooting range. No designer gear, no tactical vest, no expensive accessories, just faded jeans, a simple gray hoodie, and scars that traced along her left arm. Like a roadmap of pain. The wealthy shooters glanced up from their custom rifles and smirked. She must be lost. Probably someone's wife dropping off lunch money. Their whispers spread like wildfire, mocking her clothes, her silence, her audacity. To step foot in their exclusive world. But what they didn't know was that those scars told a story that would soon bring a 4-star general to his knees in respect. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Elena Martinez pushed through the heavy glass doors of Precision Point Shooting Range at exactly 9:30 a.m. on a crisp Tuesday morning. The facility was nothing like the military ranges she remembered. This was luxury disguised as sport. Polished marble floors gleamed under designer lighting. Trophy cases lined the walls, filled with medals and awards from competitive shooters whose names appeared in magazines. The air smelled of expensive cologne mixed with gun oil and leather. At 34, Elena didn't look like someone who belonged here. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, no expensive styling or highlights. Her hoodie had seen better days, soft from too many washes, with a small hole near the left pocket that she'd never bothered to mend. Her jeans were clean but clearly purchased from a discount store, not the boutique brands that surrounded her. Most noticeable of all were the scars, thick, raised lines that started at her left wrist and disappeared under her sleeve, continuing up her arm like twisted vines. She carried a basic black duffel bag, the kind sold at Army surplus stores for $20. No monogrammed leather cases, no wheeled tactical containers with custom foam inserts. Just a simple bag that had traveled more miles than most people's cars. Inside, carefully wrapped in an old towel, lay her service weapon, a standard issue Beretta M9 that had been her companion through 3 tours of duty. The reception area buzzed with the kind of conversation that only money could buy. A group of men in their 50s discussed their latest custom rifle builds, each modification costing more than Elena's monthly rent. Their voices carried the confidence of people who had never been told no, or you can't afford that. Designer. Shooting glasses hung from their necks on Italian leather straps. Their clothes bore subtle logos, Blackhawk, 5.11 Tactical, brands that whispered wealth to those who knew. Near the premium lanes, a woman with perfectly manicured nails adjusted the scope on a rifle that cost more than Elena's car. Her name was Jessica Chun, daughter of a tech mogul, whose Instagram was filled with photos of her hobby. She wore head-to-toe tactical gear that had never seen actual combat, each piece carefully selected for its aesthetic appeal rather than function. Her shooting glasses alone cost $800. Marcus Webb stood nearby, cleaning his competition pistol with movements that suggested he thought everyone was watching. At 28, he was the range's golden boy in multiple state championships, a trust fund that kept him in custom ammunition, and an ego that filled every room he entered. His shooting jacket was adorned with patches from competitions around the world, each one a testament to his dedication to the sport. He'd never served in the military, but he wore tactical boots and spoke in abbreviated phrases that he thought made him sound like a operator. Elena approached the counter where a young woman with blonde highlights and a company polo shirt looked up with the practiced smile of customer service. Her name tag read SARAH Range Instructor, but her expression quickly shifted when she took in Elena's appearance. "Can I help you?" Sarah asked, her tone suggesting she hoped the answer would be brief. "I'd like to rent lane time," Elena said. Quietly, her voice carrying a slight accent that spoke of Texas border towns and military bases. "1 hour, please." Sarah's eyes traveled from Elena's scuffed sneakers to her discount store clothes, lingering on the visible scars. "This is a premium facility," she said slowly, as if explaining to a child. "Our lane fees start at $75 per hour, plus equipment rental, plus ammunition costs. Most people spend upward of $200 for a session." Elena reached into her hoodie pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. She counted out exact bills, 3 20s, a 10, and a 5, placing them on the counter with steady hands. "1 hour," she repeated. Sarah hesitated, glancing toward the premium lanes where Jessica Chun was now openly staring. "Do you have your own firearm, or will you need to rent?" "I have my own. Proof of training or certification?" Elena unzipped a side pocket of her duffel bag and produced a laminated card, her concealed carry permit, issued by the state of Texas. Sarah studied it with the intensity of a border guard, clearly hoping to find a reason to turn Elena away. "This expires next month," Sarah noted. "It's still valid today." Reluctantly, Sarah processed the payment and handed Elena a clipboard with safety waivers and liability forms. "Lane 12, she said, pointing toward the far end of the range. "The lane's down there." Elena noticed the assignment immediately. Lane 12 was the furthest from the premium sections, separated by a concrete pillar that would keep her out of sight from the main viewing area. It was where they put the budget shooters, the ones who might make the wealthy clients uncomfortable with their presence. As Elena walked toward her assigned lane, conversations paused. Marcus Webb looked up from his custom pistol, his expression shifting from curiosity to amusement. He nudged his shooting partner, a man in his 40s wearing a polo shirt with a private club logo. "Look at that," Marcus said, just loud enough to be heard. "Someone's lost." Jessica Chun turned fully to watch Elena's progress across the range floor. Her perfectly lipsticked mouth curved into a smirk. "Is this place starting to let anyone in?" she asked her companion, a woman whose designer handbag cost more than Elena's monthly salary. "Maybe she's here to clean something," the companion replied, earning a laugh from their group. Elena's pace never changed. She walked with purpose, her head up, her shoulders square. She'd heard worse in military mess halls and survived mortar fire in Afghan valleys. A few privileged civilians with expensive toys weren't going to break her stride. She reached lane 12 and set her duffel bag on the small table. The lane was functional, but clearly not maintained with the same care as the premium positions. The target retrieval system was older, the lighting slightly dimmer. It was perfect for what she needed: privacy and distance from the growing whispers behind her. Elena unzipped her bag with movements that spoke of military precision. Everything had its place, packed with the efficiency of someone who had lived out of bags and bunkers. She withdrew her Beretta, a weapon that had been cleaned and maintained with religious devotion for over a decade. The metal showed wear from use, but every mechanism operated with the smoothness of a tool that had been properly cared for. Behind her, the whispers grew louder. Someone was taking pictures. She could hear the distinctive sound of phone cameras, the muffled giggles that accompanied social media posts in the making. Elena had faced enemy combatants who showed more respect than these people, but she unpacked her equipment with the same calm precision she'd used to assemble radio equipment. Under fire, her ammunition was military surplus, basic and functional. No exotic rounds, no custom loads designed for competition shooting. Just standard 9mm rounds that would put holes in paper exactly where she aimed them. She loaded her first magazine with movements so smooth they seemed choreographed, each round sliding into place with practiced efficiency. The range safety officer, a middle-aged man named Tommy Rodriguez, approached her station. Unlike the others, his expression showed no judgment, just professional interest. He'd served 2 tours in Iraq and recognized something Elena's bearing that the wealthy clients couldn't see. "First time at Precision Point?" he asked quietly. "Yes," Elena replied, checking her weapon's safety. Tommy nodded toward the premium lanes where the laughter was getting louder. "Don't mind them. They're all noise and no substance. You need anything, just flag me down." Elena met his eyes and saw understanding there. "Thank you." She positioned herself at the firing line, her stance betraying years of training that went far beyond weekend hobby shooting. Her feet were positioned exactly shoulder-width apart, her grip on the weapon steady and confident. When she raised the Beretta, there was no hesitation, no adjustment period. The weapon became an extension of her body. The first shot rang out. Across the range, sharp and precise. In the premium lanes, conversations paused for a moment, then resumed with added commentary about beginners and lucky shots. Elena didn't react. She simply adjusted her stance slightly and continued firing with methodical precision. What the wealthy shooters couldn't see from their position was the target at the end of lane 12. With each shot, Elena was putting rounds through the same hole, creating a pattern so tight it would have impressed military instructors. Her breathing was controlled, her trigger pull smooth. Every aspect of her shooting spoke of training that went far beyond anything these civilians had experienced. But Elena wasn't here to impress anyone. She was here for the same reason she visited shooting ranges every few months, to maintain skills she hoped she'd never need again, and to remember friends who couldn't come with her. Each shot was a prayer, each target a memory of battles fought and friends lost. As her first magazine emptied, Elena lowered her weapon and activated the target retrieval system. The paper target came forward, revealing a grouping that would have earned perfect scores in military qualification tests. She studied it for a moment, not with pride, but with the clinical assessment of a professional evaluating her capabilities. Behind her, Marcus Webb had moved closer, trying to see her target. His competitive shooter's ego couldn't resist the urge to measure himself against the amateur in lane 12. When he caught a glimpse of her grouping, his smirk faded slightly. That kind of precision didn't come from weekend hobby shooting. Elena sent the target back and loaded her second magazine. Around her, Precision Point continued its normal rhythm of wealthy enthusiasts playing at being tactical operators. They had no idea that in lane 12, a real operator was quietly maintaining skills that had once kept her alive in places where the stakes were measured in lives, not trophies. The scars on her arm told the story of why she was here, why these skills mattered, and why the laughter from the premium lanes couldn't touch her. Soon, those same scars would tell their story to someone who would understand their true meaning. But for now, Elena simply loaded another round, adjusted her stance, and continued the ritual that connected her to a past she carried with honor and a pain she bore with dignity. The second magazine clicked empty, and Elena Martinez set her Beretta down with the same careful precision she'd used for everything else. Behind her, the whispers had evolved into open commentary, the kind of casual cruelty that people with money often mistake for entertainment. She could feel their eyes on her back, studying her like a specimen under glass. Shin had moved to a position where she could better observe the amateur in lane 12. Her perfectly manicured fingers tapped against her custom rifles, stock as she watched Elena's methodical movements. Everything about the woman in the gray hoodie irritated her, the calm confidence, the complete indifference to their presence, the way she handled her weapon like it was an extension of her body. "Look at her stance," Jessica said to her shooting partner, loud enough for others to hear. Someone watched too many action movies. Marcus Webb had finished his own shooting session and was now openly staring at Elena from the premium lanes. His competitive shooter's pride was pricked by what he'd glimpsed of her target. Those weren't beginner's holes. The grouping was too tight, too consistent. But her appearance, her equipment, everything about her screamed amateur. It didn't make sense. "Probably got lucky," he muttered to his friend Brad Thompson, a local businessman who treated the shooting range like his personal country club. Beginners sometimes hit good groups by accident. Brad nodded, but his expression was less certain. He'd been shooting for 15 years and had never seen anyone handle a weapon with Elena's casual expertise. "Maybe we should go introduce ourselves," he suggested, his tone carrying undertones that had nothing to do with friendly conversation. Elena activated the target retrieval system again, watching as her second target came forward. The grouping was even tighter than the first, a cluster of holes that could be covered by a quarter. She studied it with the clinical detachment of someone evaluating their capabilities, not celebrating their skill. In Afghanistan, targets that moved and shot back had demanded this level of precision. Paper targets in an air-conditioned range were just maintenance. Sarah, the range instructor, had been watching from the front desk with growing unease. The other customers were her bread and butter wealthy enthusiasts who paid premium prices and left generous tips. Elena Martinez, with her discount store clothes and basic equipment, represented everything this facility was designed to exclude. Yet her shooting was drawing attention, and not the kind Sarah wanted. She approached lane 12 with the practiced smile of someone about to deliver bad news diplomatically. "How's everything going back here?" she asked, her tone suggesting concern for Elena's welfare. "Fine," Elena replied, not looking up from her weapon inspection. "I notice you're drawing some attention from the other shooters," Sarah continued, glancing back toward the premium lanes. "Some of our members are particular about their experience here." Elena finally looked up, meeting Sarah's eyes with a steady gaze that made the younger woman step back slightly. "Are you asking me to leave?" "Not at all," Sarah said quickly, though her tone suggested otherwise. "I'm just saying that maybe you'd be more comfortable at one of the public ranges downtown. They're more accommodating to different types of shooters." The implication hung in the air like gun smoke. Elena understood perfectly. She didn't belong here, and everyone wanted her to know it. She'd faced similar situations before, in military. Mess halls where her accent marked her as different, in briefing rooms where her gender made some officers question her presence. But she'd earned her place in those rooms through blood and competence. Here, apparently, only money mattered. "I paid for an hour," Elena said simply. "I'll use my hour." Marcus Webb had been listening from a distance, his competitive instincts overriding his social awareness. He approached Elena's lane with the swagger of someone accustomed to being the best shooter in any room. His custom competition pistol hung in an expensive tactical holster, and his shooting jacket displayed patches from tournaments across 3 states. "Mind if I take a look at your target?" he asked, not waiting for permission before stepping closer to the lane divider. Elena gestured toward the paper target without speaking. Marcus studied the grouping, his expression shifting from casual interest to genuine surprise. The holes were clustered in a pattern that would have scored perfectly in any competition he'd entered. This wasn't luck or beginner's fortune. This was the result of serious training. "Where'd you learn to shoot like that?" he asked, his tone now carrying grudging respect mixed with suspicion. "Practice," Elena replied, beginning to reload her 3rd magazine. Marcus laughed, but it sounded forced. "Yeah, but where? That's military-level precision. You serve?" The question hung between them, and for a moment, Elena considered answering honestly. She could mention her 3 tours, her combat engineer training, the eyed blast that had nearly killed her and left the scars that decorated her arm like medals she'd never wanted to earn. But experience had taught her that the truth often made people more uncomfortable than lies. "Just practice," she repeated. Marcus's ego couldn't accept the dismissal. Here was someone in discount store clothes outshooking him with basic equipment, and she wouldn't even acknowledge his expertise. "What kind of weapon is that?" he asked, nodding toward her Beretta. "Looks like military surplus." "It works," Elena said, chambering around with practiced efficiency. Jessica Shin had moved closer, drawn by the conversation and her own curiosity about the woman who was disrupting their exclusive atmosphere. Her shooting outfit: tactical pants that had never seen mud, a vest with empty magazine pouches for aesthetic effect, boots that cost more than Elena's rent. Marked her as someone playing dress-up in a world she'd never truly inhabited. "That's an interesting scar," Jessica said, her voice carrying the false sweetness of someone delivering an insult disguised as an observation. "Looks painful. Accident?" Elena's hand paused for just a moment as she loaded ammunition. The scars on her arm told a story of twisted metal and burning fuel, of a convoy that had hit an improvised explosive device on a dusty road outside Kandahar. They spoke of 3 weeks in a field hospital, of friends who hadn't made it home, of a Bronze Star she'd never claimed because she considered survival a failure when others had died. "Something like that," she said finally. "Must make it hard to hold a weapon steady," Jessica continued, her tone suggesting false concern. "I mean, nerve damage and all that." Elena raised her Beretta and fired 5 rounds in rapid succession. The shots came so quickly they sounded almost like automatic fire, each round finding its mark in the center of the target. When she lowered the weapon, a perfect star pattern decorated the bullseye, each hole exactly where she'd intended it to be. The range fell silent for a moment. Even the conversations in the premium lanes paused as the echo of Elena's shots faded. The demonstration had been casual, almost dismissive, but its message was clear. Whatever damage the scars represented, it hadn't affected her shooting ability. Marcus stared at the target, his competitive shooter's brain trying to process what he'd just witnessed. 5 rounds in less than 3 seconds, each one perfectly placed. That kind of speed and accuracy came from combat training, not weekend hobby shooting. But the woman standing before him looked like someone who shopped at thrift stores and drove a 15-year-old Honda. "Lucky shots," he said finally, but his voice lacked conviction. Elena began packing her equipment with the same methodical precision she'd used for everything else. Her hour wasn't up, but she'd accomplished what she'd come for: proof that her skills hadn't deteriorated, that the muscle memory built in training and honed in combat was still intact. The whispers and stares were just background noise, as meaningless as the wind. Brad Thompson stepped forward, his businessman's instincts sensing an opportunity to reassert the social hierarchy that Elena's presence had disrupted. "You know," he said loudly enough for others to hear, "this is a private club. We have standards here." Elena looked up from her packing, meeting his eyes with the same steady gaze that had made Sarah step back. "I paid the fee," she said simply. "The membership fee," Brad clarified. "This isn't a public range. We maintain certain expectations about our clientele." The lie was smoothly delivered, backed by the confidence of someone who had never been challenged by people with less money. Elena had encountered his type before: men who confused wealth with worth, who believed that economic privilege translated into human value. They were dangerous in their own way, using social pressure and institutional power as weapons. Elena finished packing her Beretta and shouldered her simple duffel bag. She could argue, could demand to see membership requirements that she knew didn't exist, could point out that she'd paid the same fees as everyone else. But she'd learned long ago to pick her battles carefully, and this wasn't worth the energy. "Have a good day," she said quietly, turning toward the exit. Behind her, the whispers resumed with renewed energy. Jessica Chun was already pulling out her phone, composing a social media post about the vagrant who had tried to use their exclusive facility. Marcus Webb was telling anyone who would listen about this suspicious woman with military-grade shooting skills and a mysterious past. But as Elena walked toward the exit, Tommy Rodriguez stepped into her path. The range safety officer's expression was serious, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "you don't have to leave. You paid your fees, like everyone else." Elena met his eyes and saw understanding there, recognition from one veteran to another. "It's fine," she said. I got what I came for. Those people don't know what they're talking about, Tommy continued. You're shooting ... That's not hobby-level work. That's professional. For a moment, Elena's composure wavered slightly. It had. Been 4 years since anyone had recognized her skills for what they were, since anyone had looked past the scars and the simple clothes to see the soldier underneath. But acknowledgement brought its own dangers, its own complications. Thank you, she said simply, and continued toward the door. As Elena pushed through the glass doors of Precision Point shooting range, she had no idea that her departure was being watched by more than just the wealthy shooters she was leaving behind. In the parking lot, a black SUV with government plates sat quietly, its occupant studying the woman with the scarred arm and the perfect shooting stance. Soon, those scars would tell their story to someone who would understand their true meaning. Elena Martinez walked to her car, a 15-year-old Honda Civic with faded paint and a rear bumper held on by determination and duct tape. As she opened the driver's door, her phone buzzed with a text from her neighbor asking if she could pick up groceries for the elderly Mrs. Chun who lived next door. Elena typed back a quick yes and started her car, the engine coughing twice before settling into its familiar rumble. She had planned to drive straight home to her one-bedroom apartment, where she worked from her laptop, translating documents for a legal firm that paid her just enough to cover rent and basic expenses. But as she backed out of her parking space, she noticed the black SUV in her rearview mirror. Government plates, tinted windows, the kind of vehicle that had been part of her daily life during her years of service. Elena forced herself to breathe normally and drove toward the grocery store, taking a deliberately indirect route through suburban streets lined with manicured lawns and houses that cost more than she'd earned in a decade. The SUV didn't follow, and she began to relax. Paranoia was an occupational hazard for former soldiers, especially those who'd served in intelligence-adjacent roles. Meanwhile, back at Precision Point shooting range, Jessica Chun was holding court. In the premium lounge area, her phone already buzzing with likes and comments on her latest social media post. The photo showed Elena's retreating figure with the caption, "When you try to crash the party but forget to check the dress code. #Precision Point #standards #know your place. Did you see how she held that gun?" Jessica asked her audience, a group of young professionals who treated the shooting range like their personal social club. Like she was in some action movie. Probably learned everything from YouTube videos. Marcus Webb had retrieved Elena's abandoned targets from Lane 12, studying them with the intensity of a detective examining evidence. The groupings were impossibly tight, the kind of precision that took years to develop. His own competition. Shooting, despite thousands of dollars in equipment and professional coaching, rarely produced patterns this consistent. "Something's not right about her," he muttered to Brad Thompson, who was adjusting the scope on his custom rifle. "Nobody shoots like that without serious training." Brad looked up from his weapon, his expression dismissive. So what? Maybe she had a boyfriend in the military who taught her a few tricks. Doesn't mean she belongs here. "Those weren't tricks," Marcus insisted, holding up one of Elena's targets. "Look at this grouping. This is master-level shooting. And did you see how fast she was? 5 rounds in 3 seconds, all perfect hits." "Lucky," Brad repeated, but his tone suggested he was trying to convince himself as much as Marcus. "Besides, it doesn't matter how well she can shoot. This place has standards. We can't have random people wandering in off the street." Sarah, the range instructor, approached their group with a tablet in her hands. "I've been looking into that woman," she said, her voice carrying the excitement of someone with fresh gossip. "Elena Martinez. I found her address when she filled out the safety forms. She lives in those apartments on Riverside Drive. You know, the ones near the highway." Jessica wrinkled her nose in distaste. "Those Section 8 housing complexes? God. No wonder she looked so out of place here. Gets worse. Sarah continued, clearly enjoying her role as information broker. I looked her up on social media. No Instagram, barely any Facebook presence. Just a few photos of her with some old military friends. Looks like she was in the army or something. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Military service would explain Elena's shooting skills, her weapon handling, the way she'd carried herself with quiet confidence despite their mockery. But instead of earning his respect, the revelation only made him more defensive. So she's some washed-up soldier, he said, forcing a laugh. Probably got kicked out for failing drug tests or something. That's why she's living in government housing and shooting at civilian ranges. The group's laughter felt forced, but it served its purpose, drowning out the small voice in each of their heads that suggested they might have misjudged the quiet woman with the scarred arm. It was easier to mock than to acknowledge that someone they'd dismissed might actually be their superior in the very skill they prided themselves on. Brad Thompson's business instincts kicked in. He'd built his wealth by understanding social dynamics, by knowing how to position himself advantageously in any situation. Elena Martinez represented a threat to the carefully maintained hierarchy of Precision Point, and threats needed to be neutralized. We should talk to management, he said, pulling out his phone. That woman made our other members uncomfortable. She was filming targets, probably planning to post about our security weaknesses online. That's a liability issue. The lie came smoothly, backed by the confidence of someone who had never faced consequences for his deceptions. Within minutes, Brad had crafted a narrative that transformed Elena from a paying customer into a potential security threat. He called the range owner, a man who valued his wealthy clientele above all else. Jessica was already working her own angle, crafting social media posts that would ensure Elena's humiliation followed her online. Look at this, she said, showing her phone screen to the group. I'm posting her photo with the hashtag range poser. Already got 50 likes. The photo was a candid shot of Elena at the firing line, her concentration evident as she aimed her weapon. To those who understood firearms, the image showed perfect stance, proper grip, professional focus. But Jessica's caption transformed it into mockery. When you watch too many action movies and think you're special forces, #reality, #check yourself, #precision point. Comments began flowing in from Jessica's followers, other wealthy young people who enjoyed laughing at those they perceived as beneath them. Probably think she's in Call of Duty, wrote one. Someone should tell her this isn't a video game, added another. Marcus Webb found himself studying Elena's targets again, unable to shake the feeling that they'd made a serious mistake. The shooting patterns weren't just good, they were extraordinary. The kind of precision that military snipers spent years developing. But the group's momentum was building, and questioning their narrative now would make him look weak. Tommy Rodriguez watched the growing celebration with increasing discomfort. As the range safety officer, he'd seen thousands of shooters, from weekend warriors to police officers to military veterans. Elena Martinez's shooting had been different, controlled, efficient, deadly accurate. The kind of skills that saved lives in combat zones. He approached Sarah at the front desk, his expression serious. That woman you all ran off, he said quietly. You might want to check her background more carefully. Sarah looked up from her tablet, annoyed at the interruption. What do you mean? Her shooting, Tommy continued. That wasn't amateur work. That was professional level marksmanship. Military standard, maybe higher. So what? Sarah replied, echoing the group's earlier dismissals. Military or not, she doesn't fit our clientele. Mr. Thompson already called management. They're reviewing her access privileges. Tommy felt a familiar knot in his stomach. The same feeling he'd had in Iraq when intelligence reports didn't match the reality on the ground. Something about this situation was wrong, but he couldn't put his finger on what. Across the range, the celebration continued. Jessica's social media post was gaining traction, shared by friends who enjoyed mocking those they saw as pretenders. Marcus was telling anyone who would listen about the suspicious woman with military equipment and questionable background. Brad was already planning to use the incident as leverage with range management, positioning himself as the defender of Precision Point's exclusive standards. None of them noticed the black SUV that had returned to the parking lot, or the figure inside who was making phone calls with increasing urgency. They were too busy congratulating themselves on maintaining their social order, too focused on their shared superiority to notice the storm that was building around them. Elena Martinez was driving home, unaware that her brief visit to Precision Point had set events in motion that would soon change everything. Her phone buzzed with a notification from a social media platform she rarely used, alerting her that she'd been tagged in a photo. She ignored it, focused on the grocery list Mrs. Chun had given her and the translation work waiting on her laptop behind her. In the premium lanes of Precision Point shooting range, the laughter continued. But it was hollow now, carrying undertones of uncertainty that none of them wanted to acknowledge. They had mocked a woman based on her appearance, dismissed her skills because of her circumstances, and convinced themselves that money equaled worth. Soon, they would learn how wrong they had been. The scars on Elena Martinez's arm held secrets that would bring their privileged world crashing down around them. But for now, they laughed and posted and planned, blissfully unaware that they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. By the next morning, Jessica Chun's social media post about Elena had gone viral within their exclusive social circle. The hashtag range poser was trending among the wealthy shooting enthusiasts who frequented places like Precision Point. Screenshots of Elena's image were being shared across Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, accompanied by increasingly cruel commentary. "Found the wannabe soldier," read one particularly vicious post. "Someone tell her this isn't a charity range for military." Rejects. Elena discovered the online harassment purely by accident. Her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Chun, no relation to Jessica, had asked her to help set up a new tablet. And while testing the device, Elena noticed dozens of notifications on various social platforms. What she saw made her stomach turn cold. Her face was plastered across multiple social media accounts, accompanied by mocking captions and cruel comments. Someone had even created a meme using her photo, with text that read, "When you shop at Goodwill, but want to feel tactical." The image had been shared over 200 times. Elena closed the tablet and handed it back to Mrs. Chun, her expression unchanged. She'd faced enemy propaganda in Afghanistan, had her name and face on Taliban wanted posters. The mockery of privileged civilians should have been meaningless by comparison. But somehow this felt different, more personal. These people weren't enemies. They were supposed to be fellow Americans, people she'd served to protect. Back at Precision Point, the morning brought a new level of satisfaction to the group that had orchestrated Elena's humiliation. Jessica Chun arrived at the range wearing a custom tactical vest that cost more than Elena's monthly rent, her smartphone buzzing constantly with notifications from her viral post. "Look at this," she announced to anyone within earshot, showing her phone screen. Over 500 likes and climbing. "I think I found my calling as a social media influencer." Marcus Webb was already at the range, practicing with his competition pistol, but his focus was scattered. Elena's targets from the previous day were still pinned to his practice board, and he found himself studying them obsessively. The precision was haunting him, challenging everything he thought he knew about marksmanship. "You're still thinking about her," Brad Thompson observed, setting up his own equipment at the premium lane next to Marcus. "Let it go, man. She's yesterday's news." "It's not that simple," Marcus replied, adjusting his stance. "I've been shooting competitively for 8 years. I've trained with Olympic coaches, spent thousands on equipment. And this woman with a beat-up military surplus pistol outshot me without even trying." Brad's expression hardened. Are you actually defending her? I'm stating facts, Marcus said, firing a round that went wide of his intended target. Something doesn't add up. Sarah, the range instructor, approached their lanes with a clipboard and a satisfied expression. Good news, she announced. Management reviewed yesterday's incident and decided to implement new screening procedures. No more walk-ins without proper verification of membership or sponsorship. The policy was clearly designed to prevent another Elena Martinez situation, ensuring that only the right kind of people could access Precision Point's facilities. It was discrimination dressed up as security, exclusion wrapped in the language of standards. What kind of verification? Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Background checks, reference letters from current members. Financial pre-qualification, Sarah listed with obvious pride. We're also implementing a dress code. Professional attire only. No more questionable fashion choices. Jessica laughed, adding another photo to her social media story. Perfect. We can't have random people wandering in and making our members uncomfortable. But their celebration was interrupted by an unexpected arrival. A woman in her 50s, wearing a simple business suit and carrying a government identification badge, walked through the range's front doors. Her bearing was professional, her expression serious. She approached the front desk where Sarah was still discussing the new policies. I'm looking for information about a woman who was here yesterday, the official said, showing her credentials. Elena Martinez. I understand there was some kind of incident. Sarah's confident expression faltered. What kind of information? The nature of her visit, how she was treated, whether there were any problems, the woman continued. I'm Agent Carol Stevens, Department of Veterans Affairs, Office of Inspector General. The mention of official government involvement sent a chill through the premium lanes. Jessica discreetly pocketed her phone, suddenly aware that her viral post might have attracted the wrong kind of attention. Marcus stopped shooting entirely, moving closer to hear the conversation. There was no incident, Sarah said quickly. She came in, used a lane, and left. Standard procedure. Agent Stevens pulled out a tablet and showed Sarah a screenshot of Jessica's viral post. This suggests otherwise. Social media posts mocking a military veteran, harassment based on her appearance and economic status. That could constitute violation of several federal anti-discrimination statutes. The blood drained from Sarah's face. We don't control what our customers post on social media. No, but you control the environment that enables such behavior, Stevens replied. I'll need to speak with everyone who was here yesterday, starting with whoever took and posted these photos. Jessica Chun tried to blend into the crowd, but her distinctive custom tactical gear made her impossible to miss. Stevens walked directly to her lane, her expression neutral but her intent clear. Miss Chun, I presume? Your social media accounts show you were quite active yesterday. I was just ... Sharing my experience, Jessica stammered, her earlier confidence evaporating. Freedom of speech, right? Certainly, Stevens agreed. But harassment of a military veteran raises different legal questions, especially when that veteran holds certain security clearances and commendations that you're not authorized to know about. The implication hung in the air like smoke from a discharged weapon. Elena Martinez wasn't just any former soldier. She was someone with a classified background, someone whose service record contained information that ordinary civilians weren't. Cleared to access. Marcus Webb felt his stomach drop. He'd been right to be suspicious about Elena's capabilities, but wrong about the reason. She wasn't a fraud or a pretender, she was the real thing, and they'd mocked her without understanding what they were dealing with. I want all social media posts about Ms. Martinez removed immediately, Stevens continued. Any videos, photos, or commentary. Failure to comply could result in federal charges related to harassment of a protected individual. Protected individual? Brad Thompson stepped forward, his businessman's instincts sensing legal danger. What does that mean? Stevens turned to face him, her expression unchanged. It means Elena Martinez isn't just any veteran. Her service record includes classifications that make her personal information sensitive from a national security perspective. Posting her photo without consent, mocking her appearance, sharing details about her location. These actions could be interpreted as intelligence gathering against a former classified asset. The words hit the group like physical blows. Intelligence gathering, classified asset, national security. These weren't terms associated with ordinary people or routine harassment. They suggested that Elena Martinez was someone far more important than her simple clothes and beat-up car, had indicated. Tommy Rodriguez, who had been listening from his safety officer station, stepped forward. Agent Stevens, I tried to tell them something wasn't right about how they treated her. Stevens nodded acknowledgement. Your military service record shows 2 tours in Iraq. You recognize something they missed? Yes, ma'am. Her shooting, her bearing, the way she handled stress. That wasn't civilian training. The revelation spread through the premium lanes like wildfire. Whispered conversations, nervous glances, the gradual realization that they'd made a catastrophic error in judgment. Elena Martinez wasn't a pretender or a charity case. She was a highly trained military professional whose true background was classified at levels they couldn't even comprehend. Jessica's hands shook as she deleted her viral post, watching her follower count plummet as the scandal she'd created turned against her. Marcus stared at Elena's targets, finally understanding why they'd seemed so impossibly precise. Brad frantically called his lawyer, sensing that his role in orchestrating the harassment could have serious legal consequences, but the morning's revelations were just the beginning. As Agent Stevens continued her investigation, taking statements and collecting evidence, none of them realized that Elena Martinez herself was about to return to Precision Point, not as a victim seeking justice, but as someone whose past was finally catching up with her present. The black SUV was back in the parking lot, and this time it wasn't alone. 3 more government vehicles had joined it, their occupants preparing for a meeting that would change everything. The wealthy shooters thought they knew about the woman they'd mocked. Elena Martinez was driving back to Precision Point, but not by choice. The phone call she'd received an hour earlier had been brief, official, and impossible to ignore. Her country needed her again, and the very people who had tried to humiliate her were about to discover exactly who they had been dealing with. The scars on her arm told a story of service and sacrifice, but they were about to reveal something even more significant, a truth that would bring a 4-star general to his knees in respect and make her tormentors wish they had never heard. The name Elena Martinez. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Elena Martinez sat in her Honda Civic in the parking lot of Precision Point shooting range, staring at the building that had become the center of an international incident she never wanted to be part of. The phone call from Agent Stevens had been clear. Her presence was required for a classified briefing that couldn't wait. Her past, which she'd tried so hard to leave behind, was pulling her back into a world she'd hoped never to see again. Inside the range, chaos was building. Agent Stevens had been joined by 2 more federal investigators, and their presence had transformed the premium shooting facility into something resembling a crime scene. Yellow tape sectioned off areas where evidence was being collected. Phones were being confiscated. Statements were being taken. Jessica Chen sat in the range's conference room, her custom tactical gear now feeling like a costume at a funeral. Across from her, Agent Stevens reviewed printouts of every social media post, every mocking comment, every share and like that had contributed to the viral harassment campaign. Miss Chen, Stevens began, her tone professional but cold. Do you understand the potential consequences of what you've done? Jessica's voice came out as a whisper. I was just ... It was just a joke. I didn't know she was ... whatever she is. Elena Martinez holds the Medal of Honor, Stevens said quietly, letting the words sink in. She's one of only 4 women in American history to receive that recognition. The incident that earned her that medal is still classified, but I can tell you it involved saving the lives of an entire convoy while under enemy fire for 6 hours. The color drained from Jessica's face completely. The Medal of Honor wasn't just another military decoration. It was the highest award for valor in combat, reserved for acts of heroism that went beyond normal military duty. She'd been mocking a genuine American hero, someone whose courage in battle had been recognized at the highest levels of government. The scars you made fun of, Stevens continued, came from shrapnel when she used her own body to shield wounded soldiers from a secondary explosion. She spent 3 months in Walter Reed Medical Center, underwent 17 surgeries, and was told she'd never regain full use of her left arm. Jessica's hands began to shake. Every cruel comment, every mocking meme, every laugh at Elena's expense now felt like a desecration of something sacred. She'd built a viral campaign around humiliating someone who had literally bled for her freedom. In the premium lanes, Marcus Webb was having his own reckoning with reality. Agent Stevens had shown him Elena's military qualification scores perfect. Marks in marksmanship, tactics, and combat engineering. Her shooting records showed she'd once held the unofficial record for accuracy under combat conditions, hitting targets at distances that most civilian shooters couldn't even see clearly. She was the designated marksman for Task Force Echo. Stevens explained to Marcus and Brad Thompson. 97 confirmed eliminations over 3 tours, each one preventing American casualties. The precision you witnessed yesterday? That's what kept soldiers alive in Afghanistan. Brad Thompson, the businessman who had orchestrated the membership lie, felt his world tilting on its axis. He'd built his career on reading people, on understanding social dynamics and power structures. But he'd completely misjudged Elena Martinez, dismissing someone whose actual achievements dwarfed anything he'd accomplished in his comfortable civilian life. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "That depends on several factors," Stevens replied. "The harassment of a Medal of Honor recipient could constitute federal crimes. The social media campaign might be classified as cyberbullying of a protected individual. And then there's the security aspect." "Security aspect?" Marcus asked. Stevens pulled out another file. Elena Martinez didn't just serve in Afghanistan. After her recovery, she was recruited for a classified program that I can't discuss in detail. Her current status is ... complicated. The attention you've drawn to her through your social media campaign has created security risks that extend far beyond this shooting range. The implication was terrifying. They hadn't just mocked a veteran, they'd potentially compromised the security of someone involved in ongoing classified operations. Their juvenile social media stunt had attracted the attention of intelligence agencies, federal investigators, and departments of government they'd never heard of. Tommy Rodriguez, the range safety officer, was providing his own statement to a third investigator. His military experience had recognized something in Elena that the civilians had missed, but even he was stunned by the scope of her actual background. "I knew she was professional," he told the agent, "but Medal of Honor? Task Force Echo? Those are legends in military circles. We heard stories about a female combat engineer who single-handedly held off a Taliban assault, but I never thought." "Most people don't," the investigator replied. Elena Martinez specifically requested that her identity be kept quiet after her retirement. She wanted a normal life, away from media attention and public recognition. What happened here yesterday was exactly what she'd been trying to avoid. Outside in the parking lot, Elena finally gathered the courage to leave her car. She'd changed from her usual casual clothes into something more appropriate for a federal briefing: dark slacks, a button-down shirt, and a blazer that partially concealed the scars on her arm. But she couldn't hide the weight in her eyes, the burden of carrying secrets that most people would never understand. As she approached the range entrance, she could see the government vehicles, the official badges, the serious faces of agents who dealt with matters of national importance. This was the world she'd tried to leave behind. The life of classified operations and dangerous responsibilities that had nearly killed her multiple times. Sarah, the range instructor who had dismissed Elena so easily the day before, caught sight of her through the window and felt her knees go weak. The woman she'd tried to exclude from Precision Point was now the center of a federal investigation that threatened to destroy everything she'd worked for. Elena pushed through the glass doors, and the conversations inside stopped immediately. Agents turned to acknowledge her, their expressions showing the respect reserved for someone whose service record spoke for itself. The wealthy shooters who had mocked her pressed themselves against the walls, suddenly understanding that they were in the presence of someone whose courage and sacrifice exceeded their comprehension. Agent Stevens approached Elena with a slight nod of recognition. "Ms. Martinez, thank you for coming. I know this isn't what you wanted." "It never is," Elena replied quietly, her voice carrying the weariness of someone who had answered too many calls to service. "What's the situation?" "Your cover has been compromised," Stevens said bluntly. "The social media campaign created enough attention to trigger alerts in multiple intelligence databases. There are concerns about your safety and the security of ongoing operations you've been consulted on." Elena's jaw tightened slightly. She'd spent 4 years building a quiet life, working as a translator, helping elderly neighbors, trying to heal from wounds that went deeper than the scars on her arm. Now, because some wealthy civilians had decided to mock her appearance, she was being pulled back into a world of classified briefings and security protocols. "How bad is it?" she asked. Stevens glanced toward the premium lanes where Jessica, Marcus, and Brad were watching with growing horror. "Bad enough that we need to discuss relocation options. Your current identity may no longer be secure." Elena followed Stevens's gaze to the group that had orchestrated her humiliation. They looked smaller now, diminished by the weight of understanding what they'd done. Their expensive equipment and designer clothes seemed like children's toys, in the presence of someone who had faced real danger in service of something greater than themselves. "They didn't know," Elena said quietly, though her tone carried no forgiveness. "Ignorance isn't an excuse for cruelty," Stevens replied. "And in this case, it might have national security implications." Elena nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. Her peaceful retirement had just ended, destroyed by people who thought wealth and privilege gave them the right to mock anyone they considered beneath them. The scars on her arm, which they had ridiculed as signs of weakness, were about to tell their true story to someone who would understand their significance. In the parking lot, a black military vehicle was approaching. Its arrival would change everything, bringing with it someone whose recognition of Elena Martinez would finally reveal the full scope of what the wealthy shooters had done. The woman they had dismissed was about to be acknowledged by the highest levels of military command, and their comfortable world of privilege and prejudice was about to collapse around them. The black military vehicle pulled into the parking lot with the authority of government business that couldn't wait. Unlike the unmarked SUVs of the federal investigators, this vehicle bore the distinctive flags and markings of high-ranking military command. 2 armed escorts emerged first, their movements precise and professional, scanning the area with the practiced efficiency of soldiers protecting someone important. Inside Precision Point shooting range, Elena Martinez felt her stomach tighten as she recognized the security protocols. Only a handful of military officials traveled with that level of protection, and their arrival meant her situation was even more serious than Agent Stevens had indicated. Her quiet civilian life was disintegrating by the hour. "Ma'am," Agent Stevens said quietly, approaching Elena with a secure phone. General Hayes wants to speak with you before he comes inside." Elena took the phone with steady hands, though her heart was racing. General William Hayes had been her commanding officer during her final classified assignment, the one that had convinced her to leave military service permanently. "If you was here personally, the security breach caused by yesterday's harassment was worse than anyone had admitted." "Elena," came the familiar voice through the encrypted connection. "I'm sorry it's come to this." "Sir," she replied, falling back into military formality despite 4 years of civilian life. "How bad is the exposure?" "Bad enough that 3 intelligence agencies have flagged your location as compromised," Hayes said bluntly. "The social media campaign triggered automated surveillance systems. Foreign intelligence services monitor American veteran networks, looking for high-value targets. Your face being broadcast online with location data has created a serious security risk." Elena closed her eyes, feeling the weight of unintended consequences. "The civilians who posted about me, they had no idea what they were doing." "Ignorance doesn't mitigate the damage," Hayes replied. "But we'll discuss that in person. I'm coming inside now." Elena handed the phone back to Agent Stevens and watched through the window as General Hayes emerged from the military vehicle. Even at 58, he moved with the bearing of someone who had commanded troops in combat zones around the world. His uniform bore the stars of his rank and ribbons that told the story of a distinguished career spent defending American interests in the world's most dangerous places. The wealthy shooters in the premium lanes pressed themselves against the walls as Hayes entered the building, flanked by his security detail. Jessica Chun, who had spent the morning about Elena's Medal of Honor, now faced the reality that her viral social media post had attracted the attention of a 4-star general. The magnitude of what she'd set in motion was beyond her comprehension. Hayes surveyed the scene with the calculating gaze of someone accustomed to assessing complex situations quickly. His eyes moved from the federal investigators to the terrified civilians to Elena, who stood quietly near the range's conference room. When their eyes met, his expression softened slightly with what might have been sympathy. "Ms. Martinez," he said formally, though his tone carried undertones of personal concern. "It's good to see you, though I wish it were under better circumstances." "General," Elena replied, offering a slight nod that acknowledged both his rank and their shared history. Hayes turned to address the room, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had briefed presidents and congressional committees. "I'm General William Hayes, Joint Chiefs of Staff. I'm here because yesterday's incident at this facility has created a national security situation that requires immediate attention." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the federal investigators straightened unconsciously, recognizing the presence of someone whose authority extended far beyond their own. Marcus Webb felt his knees go weak as he realized that Elena's shooting skills weren't just impressive. They had been honed under the supervision of one of the most powerful military officers in the country. "Elena Martinez," Hayes continued, "served under my direct command in Operation Silent Thunder, a classified mission that prevented a terrorist attack on American soil. The details remain classified, but I can tell you that her actions saved thousands of civilian lives." Brad Thompson, who had orchestrated the membership lie that forced Elena to leave, felt the blood drain from his face. He'd dismissed someone whose service had directly protected American citizens, including possibly people he knew and loved. "The harassment campaign launched against Ms. Martinez wasn't just cruel," Hayes said, his tone hardening. "It was a security breach that has compromised ongoing operations and endangered lives. Social media posts containing her photograph and location data have been monitored by foreign intelligence services looking for high-value American assets." Jessica Chun began to hyperventilate as the full scope of her actions became clear. Her viral post hadn't just humiliated Elena, it had potentially exposed her to foreign enemies who might target her for revenge or intelligence gathering. The woman she'd mocked for her scars was someone whose service had made her a target of international terrorist organizations. Hayes approached Elena, his expression showing the respect reserved for soldiers who had exceeded the call of duty. "The security protocols we established for your retirement have been compromised," he said quietly. "Your current identity may no longer be viable." Elena nodded, having expected this outcome from the moment Agent Stevens had called. "What are my options, sir?" "Relocation with a new identity, or return to active classified status with full protection," Hayes replied. "Neither option gives you the quiet life you wanted." The conversation was taking place in front of the civilians who had caused the crisis, and Hayes seemed to be deliberately ensuring they understood the consequences of their actions. These weren't abstract military operations or distant government policies. This was a real person whose life was being destroyed because wealthy people had decided to mock her appearance. Tommy Rodriguez, the range safety officer who had tried to defend Elena, stepped forward. "General, I tried to tell them she was military. Her bearing, her shooting, everything about her said professional." Hayes nodded acknowledgement. "Your service record shows good instincts, Sergeant Rodriguez. It's unfortunate that others here didn't share your discretion." Sarah, the range instructor who had tried to exclude Elena, found her voice. "We didn't know ... we never would have. If we'd known who she was." "You shouldn't need to know someone's service record to treat them with basic human dignity," Hayes replied coldly. "But in this case, your ignorance has had consequences that extend far beyond hurt feelings." Agent Stevens approached with a tablet showing monitoring data from intelligence agencies. "General, we're tracking increased chatter in several foreign networks. Elena's photograph is being circulated among groups we've been monitoring." Hayes studied the data with the grim expression of someone who understood the implications. Elena Martinez wasn't just a veteran trying to live quietly, she was a former intelligence asset whose identity had been carefully protected for years. The viral social media campaign had stripped away that protection, exposing her to dangers that most civilians couldn't imagine. "Ma'am," Hayes said to Elena, "we need to move quickly. The longer you remain at this location, the greater the risk becomes." Elena looked around the shooting range that had become the center of an international incident. 24 hours ago, she'd been a translator living quietly in a small apartment, helping elderly neighbors and trying to forget the nightmares that still woke her in the middle of the night. Now she was back in the world of classified briefings and security protocols, her peaceful retirement destroyed by people who had judged her based on her clothes and scars. "I understand, sir," she said quietly. Hayes turned to face the group of wealthy shooters who had orchestrated Elena's humiliation. His expression carried the weight of someone who had seen the cost of war, who understood the sacrifice required to protect the freedoms that these people took for granted. "Your actions yesterday," he said, his voice carrying barely controlled anger, "have not only destroyed an American hero's chance at a peaceful retirement, but have potentially endangered ongoing operations that protect this country's security. I want you to understand that Elena Martinez risked her life repeatedly so that people like you could live in safety and comfort." The shame in the room was palpable. These people had spent their lives accumulating wealth and status, measuring their worth by their possessions and social position. But they were face to face with someone whose worth was measured in lives saved and freedoms protected, whose scars told stories of sacrifice they couldn't comprehend. Elena Martinez, the woman they had mocked for her simple clothes and visible wounds, was about to be acknowledged in a way that would shatter their comfortable assumptions about value and worth. The scars on her arm weren't signs of weakness, they were medals earned in service of something greater than themselves. General Hayes moved to the center of Precision Point's main floor, his presence commanding absolute attention from everyone in the facility. The wealthy shooters who had spent the morning learning about their catastrophic mistake now faced the reality of standing before one of the most powerful military officers in the country, someone whose every word carried the weight of national authority. "I want to tell you exactly who Elena Martinez is," Hayes began, his voice carrying across the premium lanes with the clarity of someone accustomed to addressing large audiences. "Not because she seeks recognition, but because your ignorance has endangered her life and compromised national security." Elena stood quietly near the conference room, her expression unreadable. She'd spent 4 years trying to disappear from the world of classified operations and military honors, seeking the anonymity that would let her heal from wounds that went deeper than the scars on her arm. Now her story was being told to the very people who had tried to humiliate her. "Elena Martinez enlisted in the Army at 18, Hayes continued, following the death of her brother in the September 11th attacks. She scored in the top 1% of all military aptitude tests and was selected for advanced combat engineering training." Jessica Chen, who had built a viral campaign around mocking Elena's appearance, felt each word like a physical blow. The woman she'd ridiculed as a military reject had actually been among the most elite soldiers in the armed forces. Her first deployment was to Afghanistan in 2019, Hayes said, where she served as a combat engineer with the 82nd Airborne Division. Her unit was responsible for clearing IEDs and explosive devices that threatened convoy routes used to supply forward operating bases. Marcus Webb listened with growing horror as he realized the magnitude of his misjudgment. Elena's shooting skills hadn't been learned at civilian ranges or weekend courses. They'd been honed in combat zones where missing a target meant American soldiers died. In 2021, Hayes continued, Staff Sergeant Martinez was selected for task Force Echo, a joint special operations unit that handled the most dangerous explosive ordnance disposal missions. She was one of only 3 women ever chosen for that program. Agent Stevens approached with a secure tablet, showing classified performance records that painted a picture of extraordinary service. Elena's mission completion rate was perfect. 27 high-risk operations without a single failure or American casualty under her command. The incident that earned Elena the Medal of Honor occurred during Operation Desert Viper, Hayes said, his tone becoming more serious. Her convoy was ambushed by a coordinated Taliban assault that had been planned for weeks. The attack was designed to capture American soldiers for propaganda purposes. Brad Thompson, who had fabricated the membership lie to exclude Elena, found himself unable to breathe as the story unfolded. He dismissed someone whose courage in battle exceeded anything he could imagine. The convoy's lead vehicle hit an IED that Elena later determined was part of a complex trap, Hayes continued. Secondary explosives were positioned to channel survivors into a kill zone where Taliban fighters waited in prepared positions. Tommy Rodriguez, the range safety officer, listened with the respect of one veteran for another. He'd suspected Elena was military, but the scope of her service was beyond what he'd imagined possible. Elena Martinez, with 2 other soldiers wounded, and the convoy under heavy fire, made a decision that saved 17 American lives, Hayes said. She left the safety of her armored vehicle and moved forward to disarm the secondary devices while under direct enemy fire. The room was silent except for the sound of Hayes's voice and the growing realization among the wealthy shooters that they had mocked someone whose heroism was literally the stuff of military legend. For 6 hours, Elena crawled through enemy fire, disarming explosive devices while coordinating the defense of the convoy through radio communication. Hayes continued. She was wounded twice by shrapnel, but continued working until she had cleared a safe evacuation route. Sarah, the range instructor who had tried to exclude Elena based on her appearance, began to cry as she understood the true meaning of the scars she'd judged so harshly. The explosion that caused her visible injuries occurred when Elena deliberately triggered a controlled detonation of the remaining explosives to prevent their use against other American forces, Hayes said. She positioned herself between the blast and the wounded soldiers, using her own body as a shield. Elena's expression remained unchanged as her story was told, but her hands were clenched slightly at her sides. She'd never wanted this recognition, never sought to have her service used as a weapon against civilians who had simply been ignorant and cruel. Elena Martinez spent 4 months in medical facilities recovering from her injuries. Hayes continued. She underwent 19 surgeries to repair damage from shrapnel and blast effects. Doctors told her she would never regain full mobility in her left arm. Agent Stevens showed the group Elena's medical records, with identifying information redacted but injury details visible. The extent of her wounds was staggering, a catalog of damage that would have ended most people's careers and possibly their lives. During her recovery, Elena was recruited for a classified intelligence program that I cannot discuss in detail, Hayes said. Her expertise in explosive devices and her combat experience made her valuable for operations that remain classified. To this day, the implication was clear. Elena Martinez wasn't just a decorated veteran. She was someone whose knowledge and skills were still considered vital to national security. The woman they'd mocked for her simple clothes possessed expertise that few people in the world could match. Elena's shooting skills, which some of you witnessed yesterday, were maintained at the highest level throughout her service, Hayes said, looking directly at Marcus Webb. She holds unofficial records for accuracy under combat conditions that will never be publicly released for security reasons. Marcus felt his competitive shooter's ego crumble completely. He'd spent years and thousands of dollars trying to achieve precision that Elena maintained effortlessly, skills she'd developed while people were trying to kill her. In 2022, Elena Martinez made the decision to retire from military service. Hayes said, his tone softening slightly. She wanted to build a quiet civilian life, to heal from injuries both visible and hidden, to find peace after years of war. The general's words carried weight that went beyond military achievement. Elena hadn't just served her country, she'd sacrificed her health, her peace of mind, and her chance at a normal life for the protection of people who would never know her name or understand her sacrifice. She moved to this area specifically because it was quiet, because she thought she could blend in and be forgotten. Hayes continued. She worked as a translator, helped elderly neighbors, tried to build the simple life that her service had earned her. Elena looked toward the exit, clearly uncomfortable with having her private struggles exposed to people who had caused her so much pain. But Hayes wasn't finished with his revelation. Yesterday's incident at this facility has destroyed that possibility, he said, his tone hardening again. The social media campaign launched against Elena has compromised her security and endangered her life. Foreign intelligence services now have her photograph, her location, and details about her daily routine. The weight of their actions settled over the wealthy shooters like a physical presence. They'd destroyed an American hero's chance at peace because they'd judged her based on her clothes and scars. Their privilege and prejudice had turned into weapons that wounded someone who had already sacrificed more than they could comprehend. Elena Martinez, Hayes said, looking directly at her with obvious respect, represents the best of American military service. Her courage, her skill, and her sacrifice embody the values that our military exists to protect. As the general spoke, Elena Martinez stood quietly, bearing the weight of recognition she'd never sought. The scars on her arm told only part of her story, the visible evidence of invisible wounds that she carried every day. Soon, those scars would be acknowledged in a way that would forever change how everyone in that room understood the meaning of service and sacrifice. The woman they had mocked was about to receive the recognition that her heroism demanded, and the comfortable world of privilege that had enabled their cruelty was about to be shattered beyond repair. General Hayes had finished recounting Elena's service record, but the weight of his words still hung in the air like smoke from discharged weapons. The wealthy shooters stood in stunned silence, processing the magnitude of their mistake. They had mocked a Medal of Honor recipient, harassed a woman whose courage had saved American lives, and destroyed the peaceful retirement of someone who had already sacrificed more than they could comprehend. But Hayes wasn't finished. He approached Elena with the deliberate steps of someone about to perform an official act, his expression carrying the gravity of military ceremony. The security detail that had accompanied him moved into formal positions, their bearing suggesting that something significant was about to occur. "Elena," Hayes said, his voice carrying both personal warmth and official authority, "4 years ago, you declined several honors and recognition ceremonies, citing your desire for privacy and a quiet civilian life." Elena's expression remained composed, but those who knew her well might have noticed the slight tension in her shoulders. She'd spent years avoiding the spotlight that came with her military achievements, preferring anonymity to the burden of being held up as a symbol or example. "At that time I respected your wishes," Hayes continued, "because you had earned the right to choose how your service would be remembered. But yesterday's events have changed that situation." Agent Stevens approached with a leather portfolio bearing official seals and classification markings. Inside were documents that had been prepared years earlier but never presented, honors that Elena had been awarded but never received, recognition that had been held in abeyance at her own request. "The harassment you endured yesterday," Hayes said, his voice carrying across the premium lanes where Jessica, Marcus, and Brad stood frozen in horror, "was not just an attack on you personally. It was an assault on the values and sacrifices that you represent." Elena stood quietly, her hands at her sides, accepting whatever was about to happen with the same stoic dignity she'd shown throughout the ordeal. She'd faced enemy fire and explosive devices with less visible tension than she now displayed facing official recognition. Haas opened the portfolio and withdrew a document bearing multiple official seals and signatures. "By order of the President of the United States and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, you are hereby awarded the Defense Distinguished Service Medal for classified operations conducted between 2022 and 2024. The words hit the room like a physical force. Elena hadn't just retired from military service, she'd continued working in classified capacities, serving her country even after her official military career had ended. The woman they'd mocked as a military reject had been secretly continuing her service at the highest levels of national security. Jessica. Chun felt her knees buckle as she realized the full scope of her mistake. The viral social media campaign hadn't just humiliated a veteran, it had potentially compromised ongoing intelligence operations and endangered a current classified asset. Furthermore, Hayes continued, withdrawing a second document, "You are awarded the Intelligence Community Medal of Merit for contributions to national security that prevented multiple terrorist attacks on American soil." Marcus Webb stared at Elena with a mixture of awe and horror. The woman whose shooting skills had impressed him yesterday possessed training and experience that went far beyond anything he'd imagined. She wasn't just a good shot, she was a weapon. In human form, honed by years of combat and classified operations, Hayes approached Elena directly, his expression showing the deep respect of one professional warrior for another. "These honors come with certain obligations," he said quietly, "including security protocols that will affect your civilian life." Elena nodded, understanding. The recognition she'd avoided for years was now being forced upon her, not as celebration, but as necessity. Her cover had been blown, her anonymity destroyed, her peaceful retirement ended by people who had judged her based on her appearance. "There's more," Hayes said, his tone becoming even more serious. He withdrew a final document from the portfolio, this one bearing seals that even Agent Stevens couldn't immediately identify. "Elena Martinez, by direct order of the President, you are recalled to active classified status, effective immediately." The words hung in the air like a death sentence for Elena's civilian life. She'd spent 4 years building a quiet existence, working as a translator, helping elderly neighbors, trying to heal from wounds both visible and hidden. Now, because of a social media campaign launched by wealthy people who thought her poverty made her fair game for mockery, she was being pulled back into the world of classified operations and dangerous assignments. Brad Thompson, who had orchestrated the membership lie that started the harassment, felt physically ill as he understood what his actions had cost. Elena Martinez had earned the right to a peaceful retirement through blood and sacrifice, and his prejudice had stolen that from her. The security breach caused by yesterday's harassment, Hayes continued, addressing the room but keeping his eyes on Elena, has made your current identity untenable. Foreign intelligence services are now actively seeking information about you, and your safety requires immediate protective measures. Elena's expression remained unchanged, but those who knew her could see the cost of this moment. She was watching her carefully constructed civilian life disappear, destroyed by people who had never faced danger greater than a stock market downturn. Hayes reached into his uniform jacket and withdrew something that made everyone in the room step back instinctively. It was a medal, not the ribbon and medal of typical military decorations, but something different. Something that spoke of classifications beyond normal military recognition. Elena Martinez, he said formally, his voice carrying the weight of presidential authority. You are hereby awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom for extraordinary contributions to national security that cannot be publicly acknowledged. The Presidential Medal of Freedom was the highest civilian honor in the United States, reserved for individuals whose contributions to American society or national security exceeded normal recognition. It was an award typically given to presidents, scientists, artists, and activists whose impact shaped history. Elena stepped forward and accepted the medal with steady hands, but her eyes reflected the cost of this recognition. She'd wanted to be forgotten, to blend into civilian life, to heal from the wounds of war. Instead, she was being elevated to a level of official recognition that would make normal life impossible. This medal, Hayes said, represents not just your past service, but your ongoing importance to national security. The operations you've participated in, both during and after your military service, have prevented attacks that would have killed thousands of American civilians. Tommy Rodriguez, the range safety officer who had recognized Elena's military bearing, felt tears in his eyes as he watched one veteran honor another. The ceremony was taking place in front of the very people who had mocked Elena, forcing them to witness the recognition of someone whose worth they had completely misjudged. The individuals responsible for yesterday's harassment, Hayes said, his voice carrying unmistakable authority, will face consequences appropriate to the damage they have caused. The destruction of a classified assets cover is a federal crime, regardless of intent. Jessica Chun began to sob as the reality of her situation became clear. Her viral social media post hadn't just been cruel, it had been a criminal act that endangered national security. The woman she'd mocked for her scars and simple clothes was now being honored by the highest levels of government. Hayes turned to face the group of wealthy shooters directly, his expression carrying the cold anger of someone who had seen the cost of war and understood the value of sacrifice. Elena Martinez, he said, has given more for this country than any of you will ever comprehend. Your mockery yesterday wasn't just cruel, it was treasonous. The word treasonous hit them like a physical blow. They hadn't just been mean to a veteran, they had, through their ignorance and prejudice, committed acts that threatened national security and endangered American lives. Elena stood holding the Presidential Medal of Freedom, her civilian life in ruins, her peaceful retirement destroyed by people who had judged her based on her clothes and scars. The recognition she'd never sought was now hers by necessity, forced upon her by the actions of those who had mistaken her humility for weakness. But the ceremony wasn't over. General Hayes had one more revelation that would complete the destruction. Of everything the wealthy shooters thought they knew about the woman they had tried to humiliate. General Hayes stepped back from Elena, the Presidential Medal of Freedom now resting in her hands like a weight she'd never wanted to carry. But his expression suggested that the formal ceremony was only the beginning of revelations that would forever change how everyone in precision point shooting range understood the woman they had mocked. "There's something else," Hayes said, his voice carrying a gravity that made even his security details straighten unconsciously. "Something that Elena herself doesn't know, because it was classified above her clearance level." Elena looked up sharply, her composure cracking slightly for the first time during the ordeal. In the world of classified operations, information was compartmentalized carefully. Soldiers and agents were told only what they needed to know to complete their missions, not the broader implications of their actions. Hayes pulled out a sealed envelope bearing classification, markings that Agent Stevens couldn't identify. The document had been prepared by intelligence agencies whose existence was barely acknowledged by the government, organizations that operated in shadows deeper than most people could imagine. "Elena," Hayes said, "the operations you participated in between 2019 and 2024 weren't just successful military missions. They were part of a coordinated intelligence campaign that prevented what we now know would have been the largest terrorist attack on American soil since September 11th. The words hit Elena like a physical blow. She'd known her missions were important, but the scope of what Hayes was revealing went far beyond anything she'd understood during her years of service. The eyed networks you dismantled in Afghanistan, Hayes continued, were connected to cells operating in 17 countries. The explosive devices you defused weren't just threatening American convoys, they were prototypes for bombs intended for use in American cities. Jessica Chen, who had built a viral campaign around mocking Elena's scars, felt the last remnants of her privileged worldview crumble. The wounds she'd ridiculed had been earned while preventing attacks that could have killed her own friends and family. "The classified operations you participated in after your official retirement," Hayes said, "involved tracking down the remaining members of those networks. Your expertise in explosive devices and your combat experience made you uniquely qualified to identify threats that other agents couldn't recognize." Marcus Webb listened in stunned silence as he realized that Elena's shooting skills weren't just impressive, they had been used to protect American civilians from enemies who wanted to destroy everything he took for granted. Hayes opened sealed envelope and withdrew a document that bore the signatures of intelligence chiefs whose names were classified. "The final operation you completed 6 months ago resulted in the capture of a terrorist cell planning coordinated attacks on shopping malls in 5 major American cities during the holiday season." Elena's hands began to shake slightly as she understood the implications. She'd thought she was helping with routine intelligence work, translating documents, and providing technical expertise. She hadn't known that her contributions were preventing mass casualty attacks on American civilians. "The intelligence you provided," Hayes continued, "led to the arrest of 37 individuals and the seizure of enough explosive materials to level city blocks. Conservative estimates suggest your work saved between 5,000 and 10,000 American lives." The number hung in the air like a physical presence. Elena Martinez, the woman they had mocked for her simple clothes and visible scars, had single-handedly prevented terrorist attacks that would have made international headlines and plunged the country into chaos. Brad Thompson, who had fabricated lies to exclude Elena from the shooting range, felt his legs give out. He slumped against a wall, understanding that his prejudice had targeted someone whose service had literally protected his own life and the lives of everyone he loved. "But there's more," Hayes said, his tone becoming even more serious. "The social media campaign launched against Elena yesterday has been monitored by the same terrorist network she helped dismantle. Her photograph is now circulating among individuals who have every reason to want revenge against her. Agent Stevens approached with a tablet showing intelligence intercepts that painted a terrifying picture. Elena's image, shared through Jessica's viral posts, had been identified by foreign intelligence services and passed to terrorist cells who recognized her as the person responsible for destroying their operations. Elena Martinez, Hayes said, is now one of the most wanted targets of international terrorism. The harassment she endured yesterday has made her a marked woman, hunted by enemies of the United States who blame her for their failures. Elena closed her eyes, finally understanding the full cost of the social media campaign. She hadn't just lost her privacy or her peaceful retirement, she'd become a target for people who would stop at nothing to kill her. The individuals responsible for the security breach, Hayes said, turning to face Jessica, Marcus, and Brad directly, have endangered not only Elena's life, but the lives of her family members, her neighbors, and anyone who comes into contact with her. Jessica began hyperventilating as she realized that her viral post had turned Elena into a terrorist target. The woman she'd mocked was now in mortal danger because of her need to share a cruel joke with her social media followers. Hayes approached Elena again, his expression showing the deep respect of someone who understood the full scope of her sacrifice. Elena Martinez, he said formally, on behalf of the American people you have protected, I want to acknowledge that your service has prevented more civilian casualties than any single individual in the history of American intelligence operations. The recognition was overwhelming in its scope. Elena hadn't just served her country, she had saved more American lives than any soldier, spy, or agent in the nation's history. Her quiet work in the shadows had prevented disasters that would have changed the course of American society. Your scars, Hayes said, looking directly at the twisted lines on Elena's arm that had been the subject of Jessica's mockery, were earned while saving 17 soldiers in Afghanistan. But your subsequent service has saved thousands of civilians who will never know your name or understand their debt to you. Elena looked down at her arm, seeing the scars differently now. They weren't just reminders of her own suffering. They were evidence of a commitment to service that had extended far beyond her military career and saved countless innocent lives. The Presidential Medal of Freedom you now hold, Hayes continued, represents not just recognition of your service, but acknowledgement that Elena Martinez is one of the greatest unsung heroes in American history. Tommy Rodriguez, the range safety officer who had recognized Elena's military bearing, felt tears streaming down his face as he witnessed the recognition of someone whose heroism exceeded anything he'd imagined possible. But this recognition comes at a cost, Hayes said, his tone becoming solemn. Your civilian identity is now compromised beyond repair. The quiet life you built, the peaceful retirement you earned, the anonymity you sought, all of it has been destroyed by people who judged you based on your appearance. Elena nodded, understanding that her life had been irrevocably changed by the actions of people who had mistaken her humility for weakness. The woman who had saved thousands of lives was now being forced back into the shadows, hunted by enemies who wanted revenge for their defeated plans. General Hayes had one final revelation that would complete the recognition Elena had never sought, but now desperately needed. The scars on her arm told only part of her story, the visible evidence of invisible heroism that had shaped the safety and security of an entire nation. The moment General Hayes finished speaking, the atmosphere in Precision Point shooting range underwent a complete transformation. The wealthy shooters who had spent 2 days congratulating themselves on their superiority now faced the reality of standing in the presence of someone whose heroism exceeded their comprehension. Jessica Chun collapsed into a chair, her designer tactical gear now seeming like a costume worn to mock something sacred. The viral social media campaign she'd orchestrated hadn't just been cruel. It had endangered one of America's most valuable intelligence assets and turned a national hero into a terrorist target. I need to delete everything, she whispered, pulling out her phone with shaking hands. Every post, every comment, every share. Oh God, what have I done? But Agent Stevens stepped forward, her expression grave. I'm afraid it's too late for that, Miss Chun. Once something goes viral on the internet, it never truly disappears. Screenshots, cached copies, foreign intelligence downloads, Elena's image and location are now permanently compromised. The weight of irrevocable consequences settled over Jessica like a shroud. Her need for social media likes and shares had destroyed an American hero's chance at safety and anonymity. Elena Martinez would spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder because Jessica had thought her scars made her fair game for mockery. Marcus Webb stood frozen, staring at Elena with an expression of absolute horror. His competitive shooter's ego had been so threatened by her superior marksmanship that he'd participated in her harassment, never understanding that her skills had been honed while protecting American lives from terrorist attacks. You're shooting. Yesterday, he said, his voice barely audible, you weren't showing off. You were just ... maintaining readiness. Elena met his eyes with the same steady gaze she'd shown throughout the ordeal. Every round I fire, she said quietly, is practice for situations I hope never come, but they always do. The simple statement carried weight that crushed Marcus's remaining pride. While he'd been playing competitive games with expensive equipment, Elena had been using those same skills to prevent mass casualty attacks on American soil. Brad Thompson, the businessman who had orchestrated the membership lie, found himself unable to speak. His entire worldview had been built on the assumption that wealth and status indicated worth, that people who appeared poor or ordinary could be dismissed without consequence. Elena Martinez had shattered that assumption so completely that he questioned everything he'd believed about value and merit. General Hayes approached the group of harassers with the controlled anger of someone who had seen the cost of war and understood the meaning of sacrifice. You need to understand something, he said, his voice carrying the authority of absolute moral certainty. Elena Martinez is worth more to this country than all of you combined. The words hit them like physical blows, but Hayes wasn't finished. Your combined net worth, your business achievements, your social status, none of it comes close to matching the value of a single life Elena has saved. And she saved thousands. Tommy Rodriguez, the range safety officer who had tried to defend Elena, stepped forward. General, what happens now? To her, I mean, and to them? Hayes turned to Elena first, his expression showing the deep respect of one warrior for another. Elena, you have 3 options. Full relocation with a new identity and armed protection. Return to active classified status with military security. Or, Elena asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer wouldn't be good. Or we publicly acknowledge your service and put you under permanent government protection as a national asset. Your face would be on currency and monuments, but you'd never have a normal life again. Elena closed her eyes, understanding that all 3 options meant the end of the quiet civilian existence she'd built. The peaceful retirement she'd earned through blood and sacrifice had been destroyed by people who had judged her based on her clothes and scars. And them? She asked, nodding toward Jessica, Marcus, and Brad. Hayes's expression hardened. The harassment of a classified intelligence asset constitutes multiple federal crimes. Cyberbullying of a Medal of Honor recipient violates specific statutes designed to protect our nation's heroes. And the security breach they caused has endangered ongoing operations. Agent Stevens stepped forward with a tablet showing arrest warrants that had been prepared during the morning's investigation. Jessica Chun, you're under arrest for cyber harassment of a protected individual, violation of federal anti-discrimination statutes, and endangering national security through reckless dissemination of classified information. Jessica began sobbing as federal agents moved to place her in handcuffs. Her designer tactical vest and expensive shooting gear now seemed like evidence of her pretension rather than symbols of her status. Marcus Webb, Stevens continued, you're under arrest for harassment of a military veteran, intimidation of a protected witness, and conspiracy to violate federal anti-discrimination laws. Marcus submitted to arrest without resistance, his competitive shooting trophies and expensive equipment suddenly meaningless in the face of his moral failure. Brad Thompson, Stevens said, you're under arrest for filing false reports, discrimination in public accommodation, conspiracy to harass a protected individual, and accessory to endangering national security. Brad's business instincts, which had served him well in corporate boardrooms, were useless against the weight of federal law enforcement. His lies and manipulations had finally met consequences he couldn't negotiate or buy his way out of. Sarah, the range instructor who had tried to exclude Elena, watched in horror as her customers were arrested. What about the range? She asked desperately. What about our business? General Hayes turned to her with an expression of cold disgust. Precision point shooting range enabled and encouraged the harassment of a Medal of Honor recipient. The facility's operating license is under federal review, and civil lawsuits from veterans organizations are already being filed. The complete reversal was stunning in its scope. 24 hours earlier, Elena Martinez had been dismissed as a poor woman who didn't belong in their exclusive facility. Now she stood holding the Presidential Medal of Freedom while her tormentors were led away in handcuffs. Their privileged world collapsed around them. Elena watched the arrests with no visible satisfaction, only the quiet sadness of someone who had seen too much of humanity's capacity for both cruelty and justice. She'd never wanted recognition or revenge. She'd only wanted to be left alone to heal from wounds that went deeper than the scars on her arm. Elena, General Hayes said quietly, I'm sorry it came to this. You deserve the peaceful retirement you were seeking. People like them exist everywhere, Elena replied, her voice carrying the weariness of someone who had faced prejudice and cruelty throughout her service. I learned long ago that some battles choose you whether you want to fight them or not. Tommy Rodriguez approached Elena as the federal agents led the arrestees away. Ma'am, he said, I want you to know that not everyone here failed to see who you really were. Elena nodded acknowledgement. Thank you, Sergeant. Your service record shows you understand what it means to have each other's backs. As the last of the arrested harassers was led from the building, Elena Martinez stood in the shooting range that had become the site of her unwanted return to public recognition. The scars on her arm had told their story to someone who finally understood their meaning, but the cost of that recognition was the destruction of everything she'd built since leaving military service. The woman who had saved thousands of American lives was now being forced back into the shadows, hunted by enemies who wanted revenge for their defeated plans. Her heroism had finally been acknowledged, but at the price of the peaceful anonymity she'd earned through years of sacrifice. The reversal was complete, but victory felt like loss when measured against the quiet life that had been destroyed by people who had mistaken her humility for weakness. 3 months later, Elena Martinez stood in a secure briefing room at Fort Harrison, wearing a crisp military uniform that felt both familiar and foreign after 4 years of civilian clothes. The Presidential Medal of Freedom rested in a display case on the wall, alongside commendations and ribbons that told the story of a career dedicated to protecting American lives. Her decision had been made after weeks of careful consideration. Rather than accept relocation with a new identity or return to fully classified status, Elena had chosen a third path, one that General Hayes had presented as a possibility but warned would be the most difficult of all. She had accepted appointment as Special Advisor to the Joint Chiefs of Staff on Counterterrorism Operations, a position that would allow her to use her expertise to train the next generation of soldiers and intelligence operatives while maintaining enough public profile to deter terrorist attacks on her person. If her enemies wanted to find her, she would be in plain sight, but surrounded by the full protection of the United States military. The first class of trainees had arrived that morning, young soldiers and intelligence officers who would learn from someone whose real-world experience exceeded anything they could find in textbooks or training manuals. Elena's story had become part of military legend, taught in war colleges and intelligence schools as an example of how a single individual's dedication could save thousands of lives. "Ma'am," said Lieutenant Sarah Chin, no relation to Jessica, young combat engineer who had specifically requested assignment to Elena's program. "I wanted you to know that your service inspired me to join the military. When I learned what you accomplished, I knew I wanted to serve something bigger than myself." Elena smiled, the first genuine expression of happiness she'd shown since the incident at Precision Point. "That's why we do this, Lieutenant. Not for recognition or glory, but because someone has to stand between evil and innocent people." The young officer nodded seriously, understanding that she was in the presence of someone whose commitment to service had shaped history. Elena's scars, once the subject of cruel mockery, were now viewed by these trainees as badges of honor that represented the highest ideals of military service. General Hayes entered the briefing room, his expression showing satisfaction at seeing Elena in her new role. The transition hadn't been easy. There had been security concerns, political complications, and the ongoing investigation into the terrorist networks that had targeted her. But Elena had insisted on a position that would allow her to serve while living openly, refusing to be driven into hiding by people who hated her for protecting American lives. "How are you adjusting?" Hayes asked, reviewing the training schedules that Elena had developed for her new position. "It's good to have purpose." "Again," Elena replied, looking out the window at young soldiers training on the ranges below. The quiet civilian life was healing, but this feels like coming home. The legal consequences for Elena's tormentors had been swift and severe. Jessica Chun had been sentenced to 2 years in federal prison for cyber harassment and endangering national security. Her social media influencer aspirations ended by her viral campaign of cruelty. Her testimony during the trial had revealed the depth of her privileged worldview and complete lack of understanding about the consequences of her actions. Marcus Webb had received 18 months for his role in the harassment conspiracy. His competitive shooting career ended by federal conviction. The expensive equipment and trophies that had once defined his identity were now evidence in a criminal case that had made him a pariah in shooting sports communities. Brad Thompson had been sentenced to 3 years. His business empire crumbling as federal investigations revealed a pattern of discrimination and illegal practices that extended far beyond his treatment of Elena. The lies and manipulations that had served him well in corporate environments had become federal crimes when applied to harassment of a protected individual. Precision Point shooting range had been permanently closed, its operating license revoked after investigations revealed systematic discrimination against veterans, minorities, and working-class customers. The facility that had catered to wealthy enthusiasts was now being converted into a training center for disabled veterans, learning adaptive shooting techniques. But the most significant change had been in Elena herself. The woman who had spent 4 years trying to disappear had found a new purpose in her unwanted fame. She had become a symbol of service and sacrifice, her story inspiring young people to consider military careers and reminding Americans of the price of freedom. "There's something else," Hayes said, handing Elena a classified briefing folder. "Intelligence suggests that our public acknowledgement of your service has had an unexpected effect on terrorist networks." Elena opened the folder and reviewed intelligence reports that painted a surprising picture. Rather than making her a more attractive target, the public recognition of her achievements had had a deterrent effect on terrorist organizations. The knowledge that Elena Martinez had personally defeated their operations, combined with her obvious protection by the U.S. military, had made her seem less like a vulnerable target and more like a symbol of American strength. "They're afraid." Of you, Hayes explained. Not just what you might do, but what you represent. The idea that America has soldiers like you, willing to sacrifice everything to protect innocent lives, has made some of them reconsider their operations. Elena studied the reports with the analytical mind that had made her such an effective intelligence operative. Her visibility, rather than endangering her further, was actually serving as a form of psychological warfare against enemies who preferred to operate in shadows. There's a delegation from the United Nations coming next week, Hayes continued. They want to discuss incorporating your training methods into international counter-terrorism programs. Your expertise could help protect civilians worldwide. The irony wasn't lost on Elena. The woman who had been mocked for her simple clothes and visible scars was now being sought by international organizations who recognized her expertise as vital to global security. Her journey from harassment victim to international expert had been painful, but it had also revealed the true impact of her service. Tommy Rodriguez, who had been promoted to Chief Range Safety Officer at Fort Harrison, approached Elena's briefing room. His recognition of her military bearing during the Precision Point incident had earned him respect and advancement, proving that sometimes doing the right thing was rewarded. "Ma'am," Tommy said, "the afternoon class is ready for your session on improvised explosive device recognition." Elena nodded, gathering her materials for the training session that would teach young soldiers skills that could save their lives and the lives of civilians they would protect. The expertise she had developed while being wounded in Afghanistan was now being passed on to the next generation of Americans who would stand guard against those who threatened innocent people. As she walked toward the training facility, Elena reflected on the strange journey that had brought her from mockery to recognition. The scars on her arms still told the story of her sacrifice, but now they were viewed with respect rather than ridicule. The woman who had wanted only to be left alone had become a symbol of service that inspired others to dedicate their lives to protecting freedom. The harassment at Precision Point had destroyed her peaceful retirement, but it had also led to a new form of service that allowed her to multiply her impact by training others. Elena Martinez had found purpose in her pain, meaning in her unwanted fame, and hope in the young faces of soldiers who looked to her as an example of what it meant to serve something greater than oneself. The scars would always remain, but they no longer defined her. Elena Martinez had become something more than the sum of her wounds. She had become a living reminder that heroism often wears ordinary clothes, and that the greatest service is often performed by those who seek no recognition for their sacrifice. 1 year after the incident at Precision Point shooting range, Elena Martinez stood before a joint session of Congress, wearing her dress military uniform adorned with ribbons that told the story of extraordinary service. She had been invited to speak about the importance of supporting veterans and the dangers of prejudice against those who had served their country in roles that couldn't be publicly acknowledged. The woman who had once been mocked for her simple clothes and visible scars now commanded the attention of the most powerful legislators in America. Her journey from harassment victim to national symbol had become a story that transcended military service, touching on themes of dignity, respect, and the true meaning of heroism. "Members of Congress," Elena began, her voice carrying the same quiet strength that had impressed Tommy Rodriguez at the shooting range. "I stand before you not as someone seeking sympathy or special treatment, but as a reminder of the invisible heroes who walk among us every day." In the gallery above, families of military personnel listened with tears in their eyes as Elena spoke about the sacrifices made by those who served in classified roles, whose achievements could never be publicly acknowledged, whose heroism remained hidden in the shadows of national security. "The incident that brought me to national attention began with a simple misunderstanding," Elena continued. "People saw my clothing, my scars, my humble circumstances, and made assumptions about my worth. They judged me based on my appearance rather than my character or my contributions to our society. The irony of her situation wasn't lost on anyone in the chamber. Elena Martinez had become one of the most recognized faces in America. Her story, taught in schools and military academies as an example of both heroism and the dangers of prejudice. The woman who had wanted anonymity was now anything but anonymous. But the real tragedy, Elena said, wasn't what happened to me. It was what their prejudice revealed about how we treat our fellow Americans, especially those who have served our country in ways that can't be publicly acknowledged. In a federal prison in Virginia, Jessica Chun watched Elena's congressional testimony on a small television in the common area. The woman she had mocked was now addressing the nation's leaders while Jessica served her sentence for cyber harassment and endangering national security. The contrast between their situations was a daily reminder of how drastically her viral cruelty had changed both their lives. Jessica had spent months in therapy, trying to understand how her privileged upbringing had created such a callous disregard for others. The viral fame she had sought through mocking Elena had indeed made her famous as an example of how social media could be weaponized to destroy lives and endanger national security. "I've learned," Jessica had told her counselor the previous week, "that I used my wealth and social media following like weapons against someone who had literally risked her life to protect people like me. I turned patriotism and military service into subjects for mockery because I couldn't see past my own privilege." Marcus Webb, serving his sentence in a minimum security facility, had also watched Elena's rise to prominence with a mixture of admiration and shame. His competitive shooting career was over, his trophies and records meaningless compared to Elena's real-world achievements. He spent his time teaching other inmates about firearm safety, hoping to channel his knowledge into something constructive rather than destructive. "She was everything I pretended to be," Marcus had written in a letter to Elena that he'd never sent. "A real warrior, someone whose skills were earned through service and sacrifice rather than purchased with money and leisure time. I was so threatened by her competence that I participated in her humiliation, never understanding that she was the genuine article while I was just playing dress-up." Brad Thompson had been released after serving 2 years, his business empire destroyed and his reputation ruined. He now worked as a junior associate at a law firm, starting over at the bottom of a profession he had once dominated. The lies and manipulations that had served him well in business had become federal crimes when applied to harassment of a protected individual. "Every day," Brad had told his court-appointed counselor, "I think about how my need to feel superior to others led me to destroy an American hero's chance at peace." Elena Martinez had earned the right to a quiet retirement through blood and sacrifice, and I stole that from her because I couldn't tolerate the idea that someone who looked poor might actually be better than me. Back in the congressional chamber, Elena continued her testimony with words that would be quoted in history books and remembered long after the political figures in the audience were forgotten. "The lesson of my experience," she said, "isn't about the importance of recognizing military service, though that matters. It's about the danger of judging people based on their appearance, their circumstances, or their reluctance to promote themselves." Elena's words carried weight that went beyond her personal story. In an age of social media shaming and viral cruelty, her experience had become a cautionary tale about the real-world consequences of online harassment and the responsibility that came with platforms that could reach millions of people. "Every person you encounter carries a story you may never know," Elena continued. "The quiet woman in simple clothes might be a Medal of Honor recipient. The man with scars might be a veteran who saved lives in combat. The person who seems out of place might actually belong there more than anyone else in the room." In military academies around the world, Elena's story was now taught as part of leadership training. Cadets learned about the Elena Martinez principle, the idea that true leadership meant recognizing worth in others regardless of their appearance or circumstances, and that the most dangerous enemy of good judgment was the assumption that wealth, status, or appearance indicated value. The scars that people mocked, Elena said, touching her left arm where the twisted lines remained visible, were earned while protecting American lives. But they're not the only scars that matter. Every veteran, every first responder, every person who has sacrificed for others carries wounds both visible and hidden. Our job as Americans is to honor that sacrifice, not to judge those who bear its marks. Elena's congressional testimony was broadcast around the world, translated into dozens of languages, and became one of the most watched political speeches in modern history. Her words about dignity, respect, and the true meaning of service resonated with audiences who had never heard of precision point shooting range, but understood the universal truth she was expressing. In closing, Elena said, "I want to thank the people who saw past my appearance to recognize my worth like Sergeant Rodriguez, who understood what others missed. But I also want to challenge all of us to be the kind of people who see value in others before we judge them, who recognize that heroism often wears ordinary clothes, and who understand that the greatest service is often performed by those who seek no recognition for their sacrifice." As Elena left the podium to sustained applause, she carried with her the knowledge that her unwanted fame had been transformed into something meaningful. The harassment that had destroyed her peaceful retirement had also created an opportunity to speak for those who couldn't speak for themselves, the classified heroes, the invisible veterans, the quiet servants whose contributions to society would never be fully known. Elena Martinez had learned that sometimes the greatest victories come from the most painful defeats, and that true heroism isn't just about facing external enemies, but about finding meaning in suffering and purpose in unwanted recognition. Her scars would always tell the story of her service, but her voice now told the story of something even more important, the enduring American ideal that every person deserves to be judged by their character rather than their circumstances. Woman who had wanted only to be left alone had become a voice for everyone who had ever been judged unfairly, dismissed because of their appearance, or underestimated because of their humility. Elena Martinez had found her greatest mission not in the battlefields of Afghanistan or the classified operations of intelligence agencies, but in the simple act of reminding America of its better angels. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.